Squat and broad, the humanoid creature's skin resembles stone, hard, rough, and gray in color. Like a dwarf yet distinct, the creature appears completely hairless, and their strange, milky eyes evoke beasts of the deepest, darkest caverns. Armor, finely made but crude in appearance, protects the creature's vital areas, while a wicked-looking axe at their hip deters would-be attackers. The creature sneers, their teeth stark white against the slate gray of their skin. This is a Duergar, also known as a Grey Dwarf, a not-so-distant cousin to the normal dwarves you know. Though these are dour, sad, and just generally angry all the time, and they also hold one of the most interesting secrets deep within their culture. But before we go and talk about them, let's first talk about our sponsor today. This video is brought to you by the Questonomicon on Kickstarter. My last video was actually just a candid conversation between me and Jacob, the creator of the Questonomicon book, and many actually took that video as a form of advertisement, which I get why you would think that, but I wasn't paid at all to do that. I wasn't even asked at all to do that. I just genuinely think that they have an awesome product, and I freaking love Jacob's videos. So I just wanted to talk to him about the project. It's always awesome when I can promote something that I actually do believe in, and I thought we did have an awesome conversation, even if I confused Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse with the up-and-coming 5.5e remake of the Player's Handbook. But regardless, I digress. Questonomicon is a book with a ton of level 1 one-shot adventures designed to make the level 1 experience of a new band of adventurers spectacular. If you have ever been that player bummed out that adventurers don't seem to put in a lot of effort into their level 1 missions, or if you are tired of completely skipping level 1 or level 2 altogether to jump straight into level 3, then this is the book for you, with tons of exciting level 1 adventures set in the Wild West, in the swamps, haunted regions, urban landscapes, and more. There's a bit of everything here. Go over to the Questonomicon on Kickstarter following the link below and check it for yourself. They got a ton of really cool goodies that you can have for supporting them at various levels, and there's no better time than now, considering that it is literally just about to end. There's only one day left on this Kickstarter, so it is now or never. Get it while you can. Questonomicon on Kickstarter. Now back to the video. The entry that we got for the Duergar in 5th edition is actually pretty fantastic, plus we also got an entire section dedicated to these sour dwarves in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which it makes my job simultaneously both easier and also harder. But in any case, what's a better place to start than the monster manual? We only get one page, but it is chock full of good information. The tyrannical Duergar, also known as the Grey Dwarves, dwell in fantastic cities deep in the Underdark. Using ancient dwarven knowledge and myriad slaves, they work tirelessly to expand their subterranean kingdoms. Here we learn why they are the way they are. It says that Duergar were once dwarves before their greed and endless delving beneath the earth brought them into contact with the Mind Flayers. Held in captivity for generations by the Illithids, the dwarves eventually won their independence with the aid of the evil god Duergar. Slavery had forever changed them, however, darkening their spirits to make the Duergar as evil as the tyrants they had escaped. Despite winning their freedom, Duergar are dour, pessimistic, untrusting creatures always toiling and complaining, with no memory of what it means to be happy or proud. Now, of course, the summary there of their beginnings is shortened for the sake of having it fit here in a single page, but it is a bit more complex than that. There's a bit of betrayal that happened between this particular group of Duergar and the rest of Dwarvenkind, and that's what got them imprisoned by the Mind Flayers, but we will talk about that later on. Down here, they say that on top of having amazing physical stamina, they also have incredible mental fortitude resulting from their time as slaves of the Illithids. A Duergar's mind is a fortress, able to shrug off charms, illusions, and other spells. This is very true, though what they don't tell you is that they are also able to completely shrug off a very peculiar type of illusion magic called phantasm magic. Basically, they are immune to spells like Shadow Blade or Illusory Dragon, or really any kind of psychic-based illusions that deal damage. The Duergar are psionics, which the monster manual does not mention at all, but we will get to cover that later. It says here that the Underdark is saturated with strange magical power which the Duergar absorbed over generations of imprisonment. A Duergar can increase its size and strength for a short time, becoming a powerful ogre-sized warrior. If it faces a foe it cannot fight, or when spying on creatures approaching its territory, it can just as easily become invisible to slop away into the darkness. In actuality, these abilities are not necessarily because of the latent energies of the Underdark, but instead it is, well, part of their psionics which were granted to them by the Mind Flayers. Again, more on that later. Lastly here, and this is the fun part of this entire entry, it says that Asmodeus, a Lord of the Nine Hells, has been known to impersonate Duergar gods in order to cultivate the evil brimming in the hearts of the Grey Dwarves. He offers them divine guidance and vengeance against their enemies while urging them on towards greater acts of tyranny, all the while concealing his true identity. This part is sick, and it opens up so many doors, and you might need to know that it may indeed go even deeper than that. But anyways, here's the stat sheet, and most of what it is in here was covered by the lore, which is great, so I don't have to really do much here. The Duergar are actually supposed to be completely immune to charms and illusions, not just resistant, and they're also supposed to be 100% immune to poison as well, so they nerfed them there quite a bit. Everything else is pretty straightforward though, as the lord described it. They can grow larger to become stronger, and then can turn invisible to hide from their enemies. But there it is, the monster manual entry for these creatures, and now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about what they don't tell you about the Duergar. The first thing that we need to talk about to truly understand these Grey Dwarves is their history, since that's the reason why they are the way they are. To give you a timeline that makes sense, they escaped their imprisonment from the Mind Flayers about 5,500 years ago. By that point, they had already been slaves for around 4,000 years. But to tell you this story, we really have to go even farther back. See, dwarves, as you can imagine, are a race that had their heyday millennia ago, but then eventually fell over time as other species took over their territories and dismantled their kingdoms. Originally, about 13,000 or 14,000 years ago, the elves had their massive war that eventually ended with the Dark Elves becoming the Drow, as you know, and then being banished down into the Underdark. Well, those Drow were dominating everything underground because they were so strong, and basically invaded and destroyed the original empire of the Mountain Dwarves, also known as the Shield Dwarves. Now, these dwarves were forced to migrate further north, and during this massive migration, their king and leader killed 4 badass blue dragons, which then were transformed into a big throne, which became sort of like this symbol of power within the dwarven community. Well, that's the same throne that you see in Storm King's Thunder. I wanted to bring that up because I felt like you guys would find that interesting. But anyways, this king and hero of the dwarves had 8 sons, and each of them were sent to spread and build each their own cities, in such a way so that each of these cities would then take over a god of the dwarvish pantheon as their main god patron. All of these cities combined we call the ancient kingdom of Xanatar. Well, wouldn't you know it, one of these cities was owned by Clan Duergar, just a normal city of mountain dwarves who for their city took on the patron god Lodagar. Back then, Lodagar was a god of artisans, magic weapon creation, artwork, things like that. Well, eventually, the Drow once again attacked this kingdom, but thanks to the combined effort of all of these cities banded together, they defeated the Drow. These we call the Spider Wars. The region owned by Clan Duergar was called back then the Iron Kingdom, and they were pretty powerful but also very greedy. And with the first victories against the Drow, they themselves wanted to make their own leader, the king of the Iron Kingdom, into the High King of the entire empire of Xanatar, which of course the other clans rejected. In a bid to punish the rest of the dwarves, the Iron Kingdom, the Clan Duergar, sort of decided to just separate from the rest of the dwarvish empire at the time, which they ended up paying for very dearly. See, when the Spider Wars had ended, the Mindstalker Wars had started. Basically, dwarves versus Mind Flayers. Overall, the dwarves actually won those battles pretty well too, but with the Iron Kingdom now separated from the rest of the dwarves, the Mind Flayers took advantage and invaded them and then controlled them. The fact that no concerted effort was made by the Kingdom of the Dwarves, the Kingdom of Xanatar, to liberate Clan Duergar and their kingdom from the depredations of the Mind Flayers is actually what grew in them this spite for other dwarves, and it is why the Duergar hate other dwarves. Like I said before, this domination of the Mind Flayers over them lasted around 4,000 years, in which the Mind Flayers effectively permanently changed them into what they are today. Over time, as far as the other dwarves are concerned, the kingdom of Xanatar eventually sort of got destroyed, and the dwarves were forced to travel not just further north, but also to push much more closer into the surface, while the Duergar were kept underground. This is why Duergar's skin tone was evolved to match the dark caves of the Underdark, while the skin tones of the mountain dwarves has remained light. Now, the one thing that you need to understand from this domination of the Mind Flayers that will help you truly understand how the Duergar feel is that because of the constant mental domination and the lack of self-control and sentience that the Clan Duergar was forced to follow, their imagination and creativity was completely destroyed. Duergar are effectively dwarves without inventiveness or the ability to feel inspiration. They still possess the dwarven nature of being greedy and the ability and desire to smith granted to them from birth, but without the ability to express themselves, which results in dour, boring, dull creations that grants them no semblance of satisfaction or happiness. Even though they feel no completeness from creating, they still feel that need to create. They construct things for practical reasons, more, quantity over quality and without any ornamentation or beauty. This has bled into their culture to form Duergar kingdoms where the very concept of happiness is bred out and punished, with their children being taught from very early on that life sucks, and then they are physically punished heavily to grow physically and mentally stronger dwarves. Now, during these 4,000 years of Mind Flayer domination, the Duergar obtained the ability to produce psionics. It is a bit unclear whether this was granted by the Mind Flayers in order to produce stronger and better slaves, or if it was just an innate ability born into them from years of mental training in order to resist the powers of the Illithid. If you're actually interested, the place where the clan Duergar was kept was this enormous Mind Flayer city called Orundol, probably the biggest and first Illithid kingdom on Faerun. The sort of leader of the city is this massive elder brain called Encephalithid, which is said to be the most powerful psionic in the world, unmatched by no one save deities. In any case, thanks to the help of Lodagar, the patron god of Clan Duergar, and their naturally born resistances to mental attacks, Clan Duergar managed to successfully rebel against the Mind Flayers. And the rest is, well, history after that, with Clan Duergar making their own cities which eventually turned into kingdoms and then spreading their influence across massive swaths of the Underdark. In fact, they became really good at it. Their mental resistances and deep knowledge of the inner workings of the Mind Flayer communities allowed them to win war after war against the Illithid, partly thanks to the power of one of the greatest queens that the Duergar have ever had, Queen Duergar, who frankly just wanted to massacre all Mind Flayers. She expanded the Duergar kingdoms so much that she was then venerated as a god, and then she ascended. Since both Duergar and Drow share the love of magic item crafting and slave ownership, they end up trading a lot with each other, which keeps them from annihilating one another. Plus, Duergar are completely immune to poisons, which makes many Drow strategies obsolete against them. Eventually, the hegemony and power of the Duergar kingdoms became so great that they could openly challenge even the other dwarves, which resulted in what we call the Kin Wars. Remember when I said before that the dwarves were eventually driven out of the Underdark and pushed farther north and into the surface? Yeah, that was actually because the Duergar completely obliterated them. And so that finally brings us to the now. A race of gray-skinned dwarves who hate every other kind of dwarf, who feel no semblance of happiness, who wear dour clothes and make boring-looking weapons, who build tremendously and quite impressive cities all across the Underdark to the point of near dominion of the place. So now, let's talk about some fun stuff that you probably didn't know. So Duergar are actually supposed to be represented as emaciated, nasty-looking dwarves. And many reasons have been given to this, from the general change that they went through attributed to the Mind Flayers, to the absolute lack of proper sustenance that their particular corner of the Underdark possesses, to even a form of evolution forced into them by their patron god. Duergar don't really have that bulky, big shape that most dwarves have. Instead, they're meant to be very skinny with small but extremely powerful muscles. Just how they, in practice, only worry about function over form, so does their body behave in a very similar way, being basically peak efficiency without looking all that great. This body type lends them great ability to sneak too, which of course complements their psionic ability to turn invisible. But even without that ability to disappear from sight, their ability to stealth is very feared within the Underdark. They're really good at it, with their skin and clothing almost camouflaging in the shadows. Duergar are supposed to be a bit more dexterous too than what the 5th edition Monster Manual portrays them to be. Now, their religion is a bit bizarre as well, since they venerate their god Lodagar but without receiving any kind of joy from it. An interesting saying among the races of Faerun towards the Duergar is that they don't just hate everyone, most of all they just hate themselves. The culture and civilization of the Duergar are very self-damaging, teaching their children that it is pointless to feel joy, promoting endless and joyless toil, amassing wealth for literally no purpose, and breeding out the strongest form of dwarf that they can at the cost of their own fulfillment in life. The ones who make all of these decisions as to how life should be and what rules the clan should follow are the priests of Lotagar, known as the Thuldors. You can tell apart Duergar priests by the holy brands that they have inflicted upon their forehead, with the shape of the symbol of their god, a broken arrow. These priests create all the laws and also enforce them, but to become one is a very torturous process. The rites involves many brandings, tortures, and the performance of feats of superhuman endurance meant to call the weak. Only the best and strongest can become a Thuldor. The final culmination of all of these messed up trials pits the Duergar initiate between two crushing blocks of stone and then leaves them there in isolation for a whole week. If they survive, they then get to become a cleric of Lotagar. Now, the people of the surface of Faerun probably see the Duergar as a single unified group, but the reality is that their kingdom is honestly quite massive and very spread out, and so many different subcultures pop out here and there between them. Some of the bigger sects may remember very well the reason for their transformation thanks to the enslavement of the Mind Flayers, but other communities are known to create their own origin stories with parts and pieces probably made up, but then others which might come from truthful beginnings. See, the brain of the Duergar is different from many others thanks to the powerful psionics awakened in them, and so when in distress or when inebriated, burial racial memories can awaken that the Duergar can relive as if they were happening right there in front of them. And so stories have evolved within certain Duergar communities about the truth of their origins. A really interesting one actually goes down as follows, and this is something that you don't even find in Modern Kingdom of Foes. Quote, Duergar claimed that their god Lotagar forged the world. In the time before time, the world was but a shell nothingness, containing neither light nor life. The desire for creation existed, and the empty void of the universe pulsed with the uncontrolled desire to be. From that hunger formed the figure of a dwarf wielding a hammer, and with his hammer he shaped the void into a cold, dark world of eternal twilight. Lotagar beget Lotagar, it is said. He birthed himself out of sheer will and the desire to create. Lotagar thus peopled the first world with his children, the Duergar, the Grey Dwarves. He gave them the desire and skill to work and provided them with materials with which to toil. He commanded them to serve him with production, to emulate their creator by creating new and wondrous things. The Duergar called this the time of creation, where they worked in peace to forge magnificent items for their god, and all were content. Even then, sometimes Duergar creations floundered. Some attempted to make great things and failed, and thus Lotagar cast the unworthy into his forge as punishment. One such ambitious dwarf sought to set himself above the rest, making himself superior to the others, although Lotagar made all equal. He worked in secret, struggling to master the power that only Lotagar commanded, the ability to create life. He forged strange creatures, ugly, spindly things that he flung from his workshop in disgust. The lone craftsman, as Duergar called him, struggled day and night for a year, each time failing in his creation and throwing the mewling, misshapen monstrosities into the wilderness. All the creatures, races, and monsters of the world, animals, giants, elves, humans, kobolds, and orcs, arose from the lone craftsman's anvil. Thus, Duergar created all other races. After a year of failure, the lone craftsman finally succeeded. By his experience and will, he forged another dwarf. He made his creation taller, stronger, and more beautiful than the Duergar, with skin of copper, hair of bronze, and gems for eyes. The lone craftsman was admiring his creation when Lotagar found the secret forge and flew into a terrible rage. The lone craftsman fell to his knees, begging his god for mercy. He pleaded that he made his creation only as a tribute to Lotagar's greatness. Lotagar roared, "Insolent fool! Do you think you can improve on my work by creating a life greater than your own? You do this for your own glory, not mine." He struck the lone craftsman and turned him into a shrieking, gibbering madman without the skill, patience, or talent to create anything ever again, and thus was born the first Darrow. The damage already done, this began an age known as the Time of Perversion. The works of the lone craftsmen and their offspring spread over the world, forming societies and raising the best of their miserable races to the status of gods. gods who defiled the world with bright sunlight, green things, song, and other foolishness. The Duergar despised these rejected creations, but none so fiercely as the dwarves descended off the lone craftsman's finest achievement. These bright-faced dwarves who lived in the mountains and fancied themselves great craftsmen, rivaling Lodegar's children. Duergar refused to suffer these other dwarves' existences and hunt them relentlessly. Now, Duergar live apart from the other races in hidden strongholds beneath the earth where they work ceaselessly for the glory of their god. There, they train as fighters, spies, and craftsmen to ensure the survival of their people. They trade by necessity, grudgingly offering the least of their wares for food and materials other races provide. They disdain all things pleasant, bright, and beautiful as useless frippery, and refuse to sully their exquisite creations with such pointless accoutrements. All Duergar sneer at the fantastic lies the other races spin about their origins because the Grey Dwarves know the truth. Each Duergar exists merely to serve Lodegar, and they all dream of the day when their efforts are enough for Lodegar to vanquish the other races, blot out the sun, and bring about the time of perfection. Then Duergar will return to the cool, dusky surface where they can forge in peace for all eternity. End quote. These are the types of stories that Duergar tell each other about themselves and about the world. It is no wonder then that such a powerful entity like Asmodeus would find interest in this vile race of dwarves. At the bottom and last paragraph of the 5th edition entry, they talked about Asmodeus potentially impersonating Duergar gods in order to corrupt them, but how deep does this actually go? What the Duergar don't know, and what you also probably don't know since they don't talk about this at all, neither on the Monster Manual nor in More Than Kingdom of Foes, is that, and brace yourself for this one, the patron god of the Duergar, Lodegar, and his ascended divine daughter, Deep Dwero, are both actually dead and have been for some time. After the massive wars that the Duergar performed upon the rest of dwarfkind, this gathered the eternal hatred of the Mording Summon, also known as the Dwarvish Pantheon. For thousands of years they prepared for retaliation, and then it was finally enacted. On the year 1383 of the Dale Reckoning, effectively about 100 or so years before all of the adventures in 5th edition are set, this happened. Quote, Muradin led the assembled deities of Dwarfhome on a crusade against the dark powers of Hammergrim. Gorm, Gulthin, and Hela Brightaxe perished in the battle, but Muradin destroys Lodegar, and Clangedding slays Deep Dwera. The plane of Hammergrim disperses into the astral to the sounds of the dwarf god's victorious battle hymns. End quote. This happened completely without the Duergar's knowledge, and you might be asking, how is that possible, since normally when a god dies, all of their clerics automatically lose their powers? See, that is because Asmodeus had already been subsuming the identity of both Lodegar and Deep Dwera, absorbing all prayers sent to those deities and then providing divine powers in their stead. This is something that Asmodeus does, of course, for the longest time known as the God of Lies. If you're interested in how Asmodeus can do these things, or how far that rabbit hole goes, feel free to watch this video of mine where we go hella deep on the secrets and hidden facts of Asmodeus and who he truly is. Hint? He might not even be a devil or an angel. In any case, Asmodeus has been feeding off of the Duergar's prayers and tempting them into further and further acts of depravity. It's something that the Duergar find quite easy to do, considering that the Great Dwarves themselves are lawful evil, the same alignment as the Nine Hells. Most of the Duergar remain completely in the dark about this, and frankly, might not even care if they found out. They're really not that particularly religious as it is. But things do get quite interesting with those Duergar that do find out, and then decide to embrace it. If you're interested in these depraved, devil-worshipping Duergar, I actually recommend reading Creature Incarnations Duergar on Dungeon Magazine number 187. But suffice to say, these Duergar are tainted with the power of the Nine Hells. They obtain massive fire-based abilities, they become resistant to fire, of course, and they build their strongholds and empires close to lava, and then gain interesting quill-looking growths in their hair, which they can then project like manticores in order to do damage. It's really weird. Anyways, the very subtle change in leadership between Lauderdale and Asmodeus has made some very interesting changes into their behavior. For example, now the Duergar have learned to appreciate the power and convenience of machinery, especially that which involves the hybrid combination of flesh and metal. Duergar have started to imprison members of their communities in metallic constructs which are designed to create great pain on the host. Pain which then creates powerful psionic energies, and psionic energies which then fuels and empowers the machine. Slowly but surely, most of these metallic monstrosities are being created, and more do you see now the Duergar even getting rid of slave labor in exchange for the much more obedient and powerful forms of machinery at their disposal. This is the great secret of the Duergar, a secret so deep that they might not even know of it. Oh, and it is pronounced Duergar, by the way. There are two canonical pronunciations. One is Duergar, the other one is Duergar. That's literally coming from the top. I have video proof, alright, of the head honchos of Wizards of the Coast who say that that is the case. The only bad pronunciation is Duergar. That's not how you're supposed to say it, alright? So back off, bitches. That's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters, Barry Mascan, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Doc Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Terry Culp, Benjamin Bossers, Falky951, Ordoric, Prince Daylight Morning Crown, Sabim Kurshab, Solarensis, Thomas Hunt, Nathan McComb, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusader, Stalia, Olaf Kleb, JD Green, Treb909, Tony Arcee, Famine52, George Fotland, Sovereign Mind, Trevor Hess, Nator Rashura, Brian Camp, Chad Aga, John the Wicked, Shane and Sam Skinner, Stephen, The Living Guild Pack, Michael Walker, Streeblow, Describe, Herbert Johnson, The Wizard's Vault, James the Perverted, Shoddycast, Horrorbound, Jesse Feliciano, Hellion Vantamain, Munchkin Mania, and Varric for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Alright guys, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry about the lack of videos recently. I'm working on this massive project, which I should be able to reveal on my next video, so please look forward to it. I do have my parents coming over this week, so I won't be able to do a video this week for next week. So yeah, I'll be a little bit delayed, but more videos are coming. Please stay tuned, and I'll see you all then.